Welcome to the Roswell Symphony Orchestra. We have been part of the Roswell, New Mexico community for over 60 years. Our orchestra is composed of over 60 musicians who have studied and practiced for years to be able to bring music to life for an audience like you. Every instrument has a unique role in the creation of a piece of music. There are groups of instruments within the orchestra that share traits such as what they're made of or how they make sound. The instruments on stage when the orchestra performs are grouped together in what we call families. You might have similar characteristics to members of your own family. Maybe a smile that you inherited from a parent, or a tradition that continues to be handed down. Just like people, the instruments that make up these families have similar characteristics. We're focusing on instruments commonly seen in a modern symphony orchestra, such as the Roswell Symphony Orchestra. Instruments have been around since the beginning of mankind. The modern orchestra, as we know it today, started out about 400 years ago when string instruments were invented. Orchestra music started including winds, brass, and percussion about 350 years ago. An orchestra consists of 4 different families: the woodwind family, the brass family, the string family, and the percussion family. Let's take a deeper dive into each family and learn about the different instruments found within each section. Let's start with the percussion family since it's been around the longest. The percussion family consists of instruments that are struck or scraped. This group can include snare drum, bass drum, cymbals, triangle, xylophone, chimes, ratchet, gong, vibra, slap, and tambourine. This section also includes instruments used for sound effects, like a siren, whistle, or a duck call. Even pianos are included in this family because the strings inside the instrument are struck by small hammers to produce a sound.
My name's Brian Johnston. I'm a general percussionist here with the Roswell Symphony Orchestra in Roswell, New Mexico. There are 4 of us, and we all play all the different instruments in here in our particular section. In some sections, the timpani player, who will go last on timpani today, often plays timpani and only timpani unless they have nothing else to play and there's a need for somebody on a piece. The rest of us pretty much cover a little bit of everything. We do have our specialties, and sometimes the director will ask us to play a particular part, but we get to cover everything, we get to do everything. A drum basically has 2 very simplistic parts, although everything you see today is going to be much more complicated than that. A drum has, first of all, a membrane, a skin. We call it a head. Today, it's usually made out of a plastic material. In the good old days, they were made out of, and still can be made out of, animal skin. And it's stretched across a solid frame or a hollowed-out container, kind of like a log. And so very often when you see drums, that's what you think of. You think of usually something that's round with a skin stretched over it, okay? A drum can have 1 or 2 heads. It always has one head, which we like to call the batter head, or where you actually hit it or strike it or scrape it. And it may have a second head that may help the sound, or it may alter the sound, or it may make some other effects like the snare drum, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. The second head is made to vibrate, and that's how it helps the drum. So when you strike the first head, the air goes through it almost instantaneously, pushes on that second head, and it vibrates, and that's how it helps with the sound. The one drum that you mostly hear in the orchestra and you see is a very crisp drum. It's a military type of drum. It's been around for thousands of years. It's known as the snare drum. The snare drum basically has what we call the batter head. This is the batter head. This happens to be made out of plastic. It's a modern material. The frame of the drum, the shell of the drum in this case, is a material that's been around for a long, long time. This is a beautiful type of wood. Some of them now may be made out of metal. They can be made out of steel, copper. Woods can be different kinds of wood. I have one that's made out of carbon fiber. all the different shells get different kinds of sound and have different kinds of durability. So you'll see drums made of all kinds of things. What's unique to the snare drum is it has this nice little unit here. These are called the snares. And most snare drums have one kind of snare. They're either made out of gut, which is actually kind of a leather material, or they're made out of metal. As drums become more complicated, then what they do is sometimes if you want different sounds, you can turn or turn off different snares. So in this particular drum, I have some metal, I have some nylon, and then I have a different kind of metal. And I have an attachment here where I can turn one on or off by lowering them up or down, or I can turn them all off by lowering them, or I can turn them all on. And so it makes a completely different sound, as you'll hear a little bit later when you actually turn this snare drum on. The mallet or melodic instruments of the orchestra, there's 5 different ones that are there, and they're all basically set up like a piano. If you look at a piano, you'll notice that there's black keys and there are white keys. Well, the one I'm going to show you very quickly is called the glockenspiel, and if you look at it with me real quickly, you will notice that there's no black and white keys, but we do have a similar setup. These keys over here are the sharps and flats. And these keys over here are the naturals. And these would be the black keys on a piano. These would be the white keys on a piano. We're finally to the drums that you've been staring at back here for the last several minutes. Those are the timpani or Pocken in German. They are a very special drum. They are the only tuned pitch percussion instruments outside of the mallet instruments. In other words, they play the pitches of every other instrument, although we tend to play in the bass or low range like the tubas, the trombones, instruments like that. The timpani are made out of copper, or at least any good set of timpani is. For expediency in the public schools, very often they may be made out of fiberglass for lightness and cost. The cost of metal drums is almost double the cost of plastic shell drums. And the heads are actually usually made of a very special plastic that can adjust and stretch back and forth and hold a pitch. And very often some of the heads are still made out of calf skin. The bass drum has been around in orchestras since about the 1500s. It is called the bass drum or the grosse Kasse. It is a huge drum. It's 36 inches wide this way. It's 18 inches thick. You'll see one right over here. They always have a nice, beautiful wood shell for the orchestra. They usually either have a skin head or a special kind of synthetic head that is designed to imitate skin and again not have to deal with the problems of weather and humidity. The bass drum basically does three things. It can keep a beat just like it does for a band or a military group. But in the orchestra, it's also used to emphasize parts, especially a bass instrument or a low instrument at entrance, and it can be used for an effect. And one of the effects that I will demonstrate for you later is the bass drum roll, which is a very special effect. It's often used to either make a certain feeling like of doom or something is coming and you're not sure what it is, or that we're leading to the climax of a piece. Very much like the timpani, very often the bass drum and the timpani will roll at the end and make their sound while everybody else plays their final note.
Next, let's talk about the string family. In an orchestra, there are more string players than any other section. String instruments can trace their ancestors back to the Middle Ages. Orchestras today consist of violins, violas, cellos, and basses, all of which have tightly stretched strings that vibrate when they are plucked or played with a bow. They are hollow wooden instruments. The four strings range from the smallest, violins, which play the highest notes, to the bass, which is the biggest and plays the lowest notes.
The string section of the orchestra is made up of four different instruments that have four strings on them. You make different sounds using your bow, or you can pizzicato, pluck the strings to also make music. The string section is made up of violins, violas, cellos, and basses. They get progressively larger in size, and when they are larger in size, the sounds that they make are deeper and lower. There are, occasionally you will hear harps playing, those are string instruments, and also guitars. Guitars are string instruments. Pianos are also considered to be string and percussion instruments. You can either use a bow or you can pluck with your fingers to make different sounds. Composers want different effects in the music, and as a result then they will ask you to do different things. There is one entire movement of a Tchaikovsky symphony where the entire string section only plucks, and it's quite a nice variation, and it should remind you of a guitar playing. The bow is actually strung with horsehair. Student model instruments have a synthetic fiber that is used. And then the stick is made of wood. And it's something very interesting is that it's actually more difficult to make a good bow than it is to make a good violin, viola, cello, or bass, because the balance is such that in order to do some of the very fancy bowings, you have to have a perfectly balanced bow. So there's a lot to it. I'm going to show you the distinction between the violin and the viola. It's a larger instrument. There's also a cello that is an even larger instrument that you have to play when you're seated, and it's placed between your knees, and then the string bass you stand to play. I'm going to show you a little bit about the viola. I won't be showing you anything about cello or bass, but you will see that in the video that we produced for you.
Members of the Roswell Symphony Orchestra demonstrate the members of the string family playing together in a piece called Cajun Fiddle. The next family is the woodwinds. Woodwind instruments have had the most technological advances of all orchestral instruments. Long ago, they were made with a variety of woods, but now are made of wood, metal, plastic, or a combination of materials. Woodwind instruments are played by blowing air through a mouthpiece. Common instruments found in the woodwind section are flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons. This family sits in 2 rows directly behind the string section, with the flutes and oboes in the first row and the clarinets and bassoons in the second row. Generally, there are pairs of these instruments, and unlike the strings, each player has their own part.
Hello. My name is Tracy Carr, and I'm a member of the Roswell Symphony Woodwind section. Today, I would like to talk about the woodwinds in a symphony orchestra, specifically the flute, the oboe, the clarinet, and the bassoon. While today our woodwind instruments are made of wood, metal, plastic, or some sort of composite material, several hundred years ago they all were made of wood, and like today, use our own wind or breath to create the sound. Let's first talk about the flute. The flute today is typically made of metal, and the player plays it horizontally. Unlike our other instruments, it does not use a reed, but a simple mouthpiece in the head joint, and you blow down into it, like that. If you've ever blown into a soda or a pop bottle, that is similar to creating a sound on the flute. The piccolo is a smaller flute. It's about that large or small, typically made of wood, metal, or a combination, but it actually sounds 1 octave higher than the flute. So, like the flute, it is popular not only in the orchestra, but in symphonic bands, wind symphonies, marching band, and chamber ensembles. And it's particularly popular in marching band because the sound is so loud and high it does project, whereas a flute might not. Second is the oboe and its larger brother or sister, the English horn. The oboe is black wood, silver keys, and if you've ever played the recorder in elementary school, it's basically the same fingering, although the sound production is different. It's a double reed because it's two pieces of wood tied together, and oboe players do make all of their own reeds. Reeds are very fragile, so we do make quite a lot of them, since they don't live real long. Alone, the oboe reed sounds like this. Not too exciting, but when we put it in the oboe, like the flute, it has a very lovely sound. A little bit of the oboe. So oboe. Very plaintive sound, often very slow, expressive solos in the orchestra. The English horn is the larger, again, brother or sister to the oboe. Black wood, silver keys, same fingering. But notice at the top of the instrument, we insert this small metal tube. It's called a bocal, curved metal, and the English horn reed goes on the bocal. Similar to the oboe, the sound isn't too impressive until you put it onto the bocal. Reed is a little larger, a little less fragile, and has a slightly longer lifespan. So here's the English horn, equally plaintive. Again, low, rich, and very plaintive. Just making sure they don't fall over. Our third instrument is the clarinet. Like the oboe and the English horn, the clarinet is black wood, silver keys, but instead of having a double reed, it has a single reed. So it's one flat piece of wood, about the size of an adult's thumb, rectangular, curved at the top, and you attach it to a mouthpiece and you put a little ligature over it to secure it. Unlike the oboe reed, it's not self-standing, so the clarinet reed is a little more sturdy, we'll say, than the oboe reed. Clarinets come in a variety of sizes, from small to the A and the B clarinet, B-flat clarinet that you frequently hear in the orchestra, to the low alto, bass, and contrabass clarinets. They're also very popular in symphonic bands, wind ensemble, chamber ensembles, and of course marching band. When you see marching band, you see many, many clarinets. So also very, very popular instrument. Last is the bassoon. The bassoon is a very, very long, large bass instrument. People basically sit down to play the bassoon, so like the oboe. Double reed, you do not march with them. Bassoon reed is quite large, lower in sound, and a little more sturdy than our oboe reed. But look at the bocal. This bocal goes into the bassoon, and when you compare it with the size of the bocal of the English horn, very, very different in terms of size. The bassoon, when you sit, it crosses your lap, and a very beautiful, deep, dark bass clef kind of sound. If the orchestra ever needs the lowest woodwind instrument possible, they may choose or hire a contrabassoonist. And this is an octave lower than the bassoon, and it's actually so large it sits on the floor. The reed is gigantic, lasts a very long time, and it's really fantastic for those very, very low, low notes. So in closing, flute, piccolo, mouthpiece, oboe, English horn, bassoon, contrabassoon, double reeds. These two do not march in marching band. And clarinet, one of our most popular and well-known woodwind instruments in all type ensembles.
Members of the Roswell Symphony Orchestra perform a piece for woodwinds to demonstrate how their different sounds blend together to sound like one beautiful instrument. Finally, there is the brass family, an obvious choice and name because the instruments are often made of brass. Like the woodwind instruments, sound is created by blowing air through the instrument. Instead of a reed vibrating to produce sound, it's the player's lips that vibrate inside the mouthpiece. Common instruments found in the brass section are French horns, or horns, trumpets, trombones, and tuba. The brass section sits behind the woodwind section, usually in a single row.
Hi, I'm Steve Wilson, bass trombonist in the Roswell Symphony Orchestra, and today we're here to talk about the instruments in the brass family. Now, the brass family has a lot of things in common besides the fact that they're all made out of brass instruments. And the first is that we play them all the same way, and that's by buzzing our lips. You know, every instrument has to vibrate something to make a sound. For the string instruments, they vibrate the string. For woodwind instruments, the reed vibrates, but for us, it's our lips vibrating. And so it sounds like this. And when I put my mouthpiece on it, I've got a mouthpiece here, it sounds like this. And what we do is we take that mouthpiece and we put it in the receiver of our brass instruments, also called the lead pipe. And depending on the size of the mouthpiece, the length of the tubing, and the size of the tubing, we create different kinds of sounds. And so the first brass instrument we'll look at is the trumpet. It's actually one of the oldest brass instruments, and originally it was designed for warfare. It was a military instrument. And the reason why is it's really high-pitched. It's the smallest tube of all our brass instruments. It's also a cylinder, and so what you'll notice is it's the same size tubing from beginning to end, except for the very last part where the sound comes out. We call that the bell, so that flares out just a little bit. But the trumpet is a high-pitched instrument. It's capable of extreme power and excitement. But the modern trumpet is also capable of playing warm, beautiful sounds. Today, the trumpet is used as a solo instrument in chamber music, in jazz bands, concert bands, you name it. It's really in a lot of different places. And here we have Nancy Taylor and Kenny Capshaw to demonstrate the trumpet. All right, nice job, guys. All right, our next brass instrument is pitched a little bit lower than the trumpet, and it's also one of the oldest brass instruments. In fact, it's called the horn, and in fact, the oldest brass instruments really were actual animal horns that were played the same way we play our brass instruments today. Back hundreds of years ago, people would play them on the backs of horses as part of hunting, right? So in Europe, people would go out for big hunts, and they'd have horns to symbolize the excitement of that. The horn developed into this round-shaped instrument that is, the tubing is coiled on itself lots of different times. Now this one, unlike the trumpet, is not a cylinder. This one is a cone. And so it starts off really small, and it gets larger and larger as it wraps its way around through the instrument. And if we were to unwind that horn, all that tubing, you would find that it is the longest piece of tubing on the stage here today. It's super long. So because of that, the horn can play really high, and it can also play really low. Today, the horns are used also as a solo instrument in chamber music, in bands, and in orchestras, and to a lesser extent, jazz bands as well. Here we have Raymond Perea to demonstrate the horn for us. Awesome, thank you so much. And you can hear it's a mellower sound than the trumpet has, right? It's a beautiful sound. All right, our next one's my personal favorite because it's the one that I play. This is the trombone. And literally the name of the instrument translates into bigger trumpet. The tromba part means trumpet, and then the one part at the end means bigger. So the trombone got its name as being a bigger version of the trumpet, and it's actually a lower version of the trumpet. This one's a cylinder, just like the trumpet is. And unlike the other instruments, it's played by moving a slide. So when the slide goes out, we're making the tube longer, and so we make lower notes. And when the slide comes back in, we make the tube shorter so we play higher notes. Today, the trombone is used as a solo instrument in chamber music, jazz bands, concert bands, orchestras, also a very versatile instrument. And today we have Mr. Frank Otero to demonstrate the sound of the trombone. Bravo, Frank. Awesome. Our last instrument we have for you today is the lowest instrument. It's the tuba. It's also the biggest one, and we've got it back here. So what you'll find is that the tuba is similar to the horn in that it's a conical instrument. So it starts off small and it gets bigger as the tubing winds its way through the whole instrument. It takes a lot of air power to play that tuba. It's also the youngest instrument in the brass family. It was invented in the middle 1800s. And so it hasn't been around all that long, but it's here to stay. And tubas you'll find in oompa bands, military bands, German bands. Let's hear some of that. It's also used as a solo instrument, like you might have heard in some of the movie soundtracks like Jaws. The tuba used as a fantastic solo instrument, capable of playing beautiful melodies too. But its main role is as the bass voice in our ensemble. So when we're playing in the orchestra as a brass section, we always listen to the trumpets to really help us know what style to play, to know how long to play notes, how short to play notes, when releases are, those kinds of things. But we listen to the tuba for our tuning and for our dynamics, and really to really give us the full sound of the orchestral brass section. And in the next example, Steve Haddad is going to show us some of the ominous sounds of the tuba. All right, so that is the brass family. And now, in a minute, we're going to bring out some more of our brass friends to play Richard Strauss's Vienna Philharmonic Fanfare. Written in 1924, it was performed on March 4th for the very first Vienna Philharmonic Gala concert, which is a fundraiser for their pension for the orchestral musicians. And so it's fitting, it was actually performed at Mardi Gras that year. So as we're right around Mardi Gras time, it's fitting that we're going to perform that today. The piece opens with the trumpet section playing some really awesome, exciting fanfare-like music. Then the horns and trombones join in. Then the percussion section joins us. We have a couple timpani players. And you really know we've arrived at the main theme when the tubas join us and they fill out the entire brass section sound. We then continue on for a while with some really great fanfare-like rhythms, and we end with a really amazing 3-octave horn rip at the end. So it's an exciting flourish to the end. Please welcome Dr. Brad Ginevro and our UTEP brass family here in El Paso, Texas, as part of the Roswell Symphony Orchestra concert. Thank you.
Those are the 4 families of instruments played by the talented musicians of the Roswell Symphony Orchestra, who are making music for people like you. To learn more about the Roswell Symphony Orchestra, please visit our website at roswellsymphony.org. Thank you to all of our sponsors. We'll see you soon at the Symphony.